Thank you very much. I think it's a big relief that we are even discussing diplomacy. But as Alberto was saying, in today's world, it has become very rare to even think of diplomacy, let alone practice it. It's as if we have become a global war zone, where everything is being weaponized, everything. Not just trade. The World Trade Organization has just told us that in the last 3 years, trade restrictions have tripled from 1,000 to 3,000 between blocs. United Nations is spending more energy and resources on imposing sanctions and monitoring sanctions, but not on alliance building and on dialogue. So this is becoming a very dangerous thing, and it is also affecting the world of science and the world of academy. If you see how the tension that there is, resulting in, for example, academic boycotts, it's an issue that we have to discuss. And people justify it for ethical reasons. Does it make sense? Is it helpful? Whatever the intentions are. But I first would like to share with you a 20-year experience that we have had in Malta about science diplomacy in the Middle East. I think it's very relevant. This is the initiative of a lovely lady, an American Jew from Chicago, who has set up what is called the Malta Conference. And for the last 20 years, she has been organizing conferences in Malta, bringing together Nobel laureates and scientists from all the Middle Eastern countries, and even from Iran, and meeting in Malta. And I asked her what her positive experience has been and whether she has some advice to give us for a forum like this. And I think if I read what she says in her last newsletter, which has just been published, it shows us what difficult circumstances we are working in. So she said, preparations are underway for the Malta 11th conference, which is now scheduled for December 2024. Sadly, the war in the Middle East is forcing us to consider moving the conference to 2025 in order to guarantee that all of our participants will be able to attend. I am in touch with them and with many of you, and what I hear is that Malta is now more important than ever. I would like you to know that I am in contact with our participants from Gaza, and they are alive and healthy, which makes us happy. And I am sure you will be very happy to know that. At the same time then, she tells me, and this is something which we have read about, but which we have not discussed, is that, as I said, the question of boycotts are coming up. And she told me this. Now, here is an example where EU countries are harming science diplomacy. We in the Malta conferences built our science diplomacy on scientific and technological collaboration among the participants and the EU. The Israelis are ahead of any country in the Middle East, and therefore all the rest of the countries are looking to collaborate with Israel. The boycott will prevent science diplomacy for peace. Instead of boycotting the Israelis, they should involve Arab scientists in the group, and this will help in science diplomacy for peace. She was referring to a number of countries in the EU where academics are boycotting their colleagues. They say, we don't want to have anything to do with you, which I think doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. How are we going to work together? To put the responsibility on scientists and on academics for what politicians do doesn't make sense. And this is where I think as EU we have to be very careful. one of the documents that I saw about cultural and science diplomacy of the EU says this, which I find worrying. It says that as EU, we need to build alliances with like-minded countries. Like-minded countries. Now, is that a dialogue? If you are meeting only those who think like you, does it make sense to meet only those who think like you? And we need greater convergence with US and Western allies. And then at the same time, and offer the Global South an attractive alternative path. I find this very contradictory and also very counterproductive. We are definitely moving into a multipolar world where we have, simplifying, where we have a bloc which is US leaning, another bloc which we can call China leaning, and then the other bloc which is the Global South. Are we only going to talk amongst ourselves and then try to reach out to the Global South? Does it make sense? Doesn't it make sense to cut across even to other blocs, especially as the point that you made, which I found very valid, is that governments have their science diplomacy, but that is because of their national agenda. But then there are organizations, like for example the one that I have mentioned, which shouldn't be dominated by a government agenda, because otherwise it doesn't serve any purpose. And especially as the situation is becoming more polarized. This morning we heard, even from our Finnish colleague, of how even in Finland and even in Scandinavian countries, how the agenda has moved right, because the electorate has moved right. And what I find even more concerning is that even the center-left and the center-right mainstream parties have moved right. Not to lose votes, they have made their policies. I can tell you, as a Minister for Foreign Affairs in the European Affairs Council, how the language changed in 3 years is incredible. Things that were not allowed to be said 3 years ago have now become acceptable mainstream language. And now, if we want to carry out science diplomacy, we cannot flow with the current like this. You know, to become more, I understand, to become more defensive and offensive at the same time. Our electorates have become more defensive. They have become more national. They want to defend their own space, which unfortunately is built on a very false sense of identity, that we all have a single identity in a nation state, when all nation states in the world have been created out of cooperating and clashing with other cultures, with other countries, with other peoples. But the narrative that we tell our electorate is that we are one nation state, one culture, one language, one identity. This will stop us as European Union from reaching out to, if we're talking about the Middle East, for example, how can we be credible if within our societies we do not respect our religious minorities, but then with an area of superiority, and this is something that we must not have, we decide for colleagues in the Middle East what we're going to do with them in science. So I ask for humility. We need a lot of humility to be able to treat our colleagues as equal and not do things for them, but do things with them, even their priorities. If it's water, if it's energy, if it's food security. So the agenda has to be set with them, not for them. And one last point I wanted to make about the controversy that was created about religion and science. Well, I think it will be very dangerous to have the illusion that science can be value-free. It cannot be value-free, and it must not be value-free. Because I think whenever we discuss whether it's a financial crisis, whether it's an engineering crisis where machines and engines are tampered with so that we do not catch them, that they are polluting the air more, although they were supposed not to pollute the air. When we talk about the energy crisis, even when we talk about war, I think at the basis of all this, there is an ethical crisis. I mean, the financial crisis was created because people who are very intelligent created products which cheated people. If we think why there is an a climate crisis, it's because for the last 300 years, and we have known this definitely for the last 70 years, it's as if there is no limits to growth, and we can. So that is unethical, and we can bring them together, especially today, as was said. It's as if diplomacy does not exist anymore. It's as if in our toolbox we have only a hammer. Yep. This hammer happens to be a nuclear hammer. So when we break each other to pieces, probably there will be no one to pick up the pieces.
Thank you for your thoughts on this.